They were born with a smartphone in their hands. 85% of modern teenagers cannot imagine life without instant access to information, and 70% check social media every 30 minutes. When these digital natives enter a classroom dominated by paper textbooks and teacher monologues, a real culture shock occurs. According to international studies, over 60% of high school students find lessons boring, and 1 in 3 teenagers experiences school anxiety. This is not just statistics. It is a signal of a deep conflict between two worlds. The traditional school was created to prepare people for the industrial era: standardization, discipline, hierarchy. But today's teenagers live in a world of personalization, interactivity, and horizontal connections. Their brains, formed in the digital age, function differently. They crave immediate feedback, visual stimuli, and constant changes in activity. Why, then, does the system continue to insist on methods from the last century? What specific aspects of school education cause the most resistance? And are there ways to reconcile the digital generation with the value of deep learning? School is where my creativity goes to die. Why do I need to know how to solve quadratic equations if I want to be a designer? 8 hours of sitting still is torture. These statements from real teenagers in a survey by the International Association for the Evaluation of Educational Achievement reflect the key complaints about modern schooling. Studies show that 72% of students find the school curriculum disconnected from real life. The main complaint is simple. School doesn't answer the question. Teenagers don't see the connection between what they study and the real world they're going to live in. When 14-year-old Elisa says she expresses a common feeling of meaninglessness in traditional methods. The second stumbling block is monotony, complains 16-year-old Maxim. In an era when teenagers' attention is accustomed to dynamic content changes, 40-minute teacher monologues become a real challenge. Neurophysiologist research from Stanford University confirms, after 15 minutes of monotonous activity, a teenager's brain actively starts seeking new stimuli. The third problem is the lack of a right to make mistakes. At school, a mistake is bad, but in real life, it's a way to learn, notes 15-year-old Sophia. The fear of getting a bad grade paralyzes initiative and kills curiosity. At the same time, research shows that the most effective learning occurs precisely through trial and error. If you've ever wondered why teenagers so fiercely resist school rules, the answer lies in biology. The adolescent brain is not simply an underdeveloped adult brain, but a unique neurobiological system geared towards specific developmental tasks. Research by neurobiologists from Harvard University shows that between the ages of 12 and 18, the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for planning and self-control, is undergoing active reorganization. At the same time, the limbic system, the center of emotions and reward, is operating at full capacity. The result? Teenagers are biologically programmed to seek novelty, take risks, and respond to social approval more strongly than anything else. When 15-year-old Kirill says, "It's not an exaggeration or laziness," his brain literally demands movement, changes in activity, new experiences. A traditional school, with its long periods of immobility, contradicts the basic needs of the developing brain. Dr. Jay Geed, a leading neuroscientist, describes the adolescent brain as a sports car with a powerful engine but underdeveloped brakes. The education system, however, demands that teenagers constantly brake, suppress natural impulses, ignore social cues, and forego risk and experimentation. Social validation is particularly important for teenagers. At this age, peer opinion activates the same pleasure centers in the brain as financial reward in adults. It's no wonder that a traditional school environment, where social interaction is strictly regulated and often suppressed, elicits such resistance. Imagine a world where everything flashes, sparkles, and changes every 15 seconds. A world where information is delivered in bright bursts, and reactions to content must be instantaneous. This is not fiction. This is the digital reality in which modern teenagers live. The average high school student spends about 2 hours daily on TikTok, consuming hundreds of short, emotionally charged videos. Their brain gets used to constant stimulation and a high speed of attention switching. And now, this same teenager finds themselves in a classroom with yellowed posters and a teacher monotonously dictating a paragraph. It's no wonder that cognitive dissonance occurs. As psychologist Larissa Petronovskaya notes, the phenomenon of clip thinking, where information is perceived fragmentarily rather than linearly, has become a reality for the digital generation. Teenagers are accustomed to receiving knowledge in the format of short, emotionally colored blocks with instant feedback. A traditional 40-minute lesson is an endurance test for such a brain. 17-year-old Daria accurately describes this state. Research shows that after 10 minutes of monotonous material delivery, a teenager's brain begins to look for other sources of stimulation, hence the constant checking of phones and talking to classmates. What happens when studying turns into a chase for grades? Research by psychologists from Stanford University shows a shocking result. The more we focus on external stimuli, grades, rewards, praise, the faster our intrinsic interest in the subject fades. This phenomenon, dubbed the over-justification effect, explains why many teenagers lose curiosity in what once fascinated them. 16-year-old Marina, a winner of biology Olympiads in junior grades, admits, "When biology was simply interesting, I could spend hours reading about animals. Now, when my grade and admission depend on it, I hate opening the textbook." A system built on the fear of bad grades creates a vicious circle. A brain in a state of anxiety is physically incapable of creative thinking and deep learning. Neuroscientists have proven, under stress, blood drains from the prefrontal cortex, responsible for higher cognitive functions, to the limbic system, which prepares the body for a fight-or-flight response. Instead of pondering the essence of the subject, the teenager thinks, "Just don't get called on. How can I avoid making a mistake?" Psychologist Teresa Amabile's experiment clearly demonstrated the destructive influence of external motivation on creativity. 2 groups of children drew pictures. The first group was promised rewards for the best works. The second was simply asked to draw for pleasure. Independent experts rated the works of the unrewarded group as significantly more creative and original. When 14-year-old Dennis says, "I stopped asking questions in class. Why risk getting a bad grade for a wrong thought?" he describes a typical survival strategy in a system where grades are more important than knowledge. Opening Instagram or TikTok, a teenager enters a world where their voice matters. Here, there are no teachers giving grades for wrong answers, no rigid hierarchy based on academic success. Instead, there's recognition based on what truly matters to a young person: their uniqueness, creativity, the ability to express themselves. Social networks have become a territory of freedom, where a teenager can be themselves, not who adults want them to be. As 15-year-old Alina notes, this duality of identity becomes a source of internal conflict. The traditional school, with its authoritarian structure, contradicts the values of self-expression and individuality that a teenager finds in the digital space. A study by psychologists from Columbia University showed that 80% of teenagers believe they are better understood and valued on social media than at school. Online platforms form an alternative system of values and authorities. If at school, the role model is an excellent student or teacher, then on social networks, it's bloggers who speak in an understandable language about truly exciting topics. 17-year-old Kirill admits, "I learned more about psychology from a YouTube channel than in all my school years. They explain it there in a way that makes you want to listen." Digital technologies are fundamentally changing the educational landscape, transforming boring lessons into exciting adventures. Horizon School in San Diego has implemented a gamification system where learning biology takes place through a virtual journey through the human body. Students, donning VR glasses, literally float through the circulatory system, observe the work of heart valves, and interact with immune cells. The results exceeded expectations. Lesson attendance increased by 30%, and the average subject score rose by 2 points. "For the first time in my life, I truly understand how my body works, rather than just memorizing terms," shares 15-year-old Eva. Another impressive example is the Minecraft education platform, used for studying history. In Finnish schools, teenagers recreate ancient Greek city-states, Roman aqueducts, and medieval castles, immersing themselves in historical context through creativity. A key element of successful digital learning is interactivity, the ability to influence what is happening and receive instant feedback. The Kahoot app transforms ordinary testing into an exciting competition, where each answer is accompanied by music and visual effects. Even losing isn't upsetting. You immediately want to try again, notes 14-year-old Artem. Research shows that digital methods work not simply because they are trendy, but because they correspond to the peculiarities of the adolescent brain's functioning: the need for novelty, social interaction, and immediate feedback. At the same time, the best digital solutions do not replace traditional learning, but complement it, creating a multidimensional educational experience. While traditional schools struggle with a lack of teenage motivation, educational oases are emerging worldwide, where learning once again becomes engaging. The Finnish education system has brought about a true revolution, abandoning standardized tests and homework. Instead, it employs project-based learning, where mathematics is studied through urban park design and history through documentary filmmaking. The results are impressive. 93% of Finnish schoolchildren state that they enjoy learning. "They trust us and give us freedom of choice," explains 16-year-old Maria from Helsinki. "We're not afraid to make mistakes because mistakes are part of learning." At High Tech High in San Diego, traditional subjects have been replaced by interdisciplinary projects. Teenagers construct robots, create business plans, and shoot documentaries, all as part of the mandatory curriculum. "For the first time, I felt that school was preparing me for real life, not just for taking tests," shares 17-year-old Jason. The Russian Skolkovo School has combined the best global practices, creating a space where digital technologies are integrated with deep learning. There are no bells or rigid schedules, but there are individual development tracks and project laboratories. What unites these successful models? Firstly, respect for teenage autonomy and the right to choose. Secondly, connecting learning with real-world problems and tasks. Thirdly, an emphasis on developing collaboration skills instead of competition. And finally, integrating technology not for technology's sake, but as a tool for deepening understanding. These principles prove that the conflict between teenagers and education is not inevitable. It is merely a consequence of an outdated system that cannot keep pace with changes in society and technology. When the system refuses to change, teenagers resort to open resistance. In 2019, the world witnessed an unprecedented phenomenon. Over 1 million schoolchildren from 98 countries went on a global climate strike. This was not just an environmental action, but also a protest against an educational system that ignored real problems. Why learn for a future we might not have? Greta Thunberg's question reflected the deep disappointment of an entire generation. School strikes take various forms, from mass absenteeism to the creation of alternative learning spaces. In Chile, the Quote One movement paralyzed the educational system for several months, when hundreds of thousands of high school students refused to attend classes, demanding education reform. In Russia, the Quote Two movement is gaining popularity, a conscious shift to homeschooling or alternative education. Quote 3 explains 16-year-old Mikhail, who switched to homeschooling. When conflict doesn't find a constructive resolution, the consequences are destructive for everyone. Schools lose authority and effectiveness. Teachers burn out in an endless struggle with unmotivated students, and teenagers develop a deep distrust of education as a whole. Studies show, after a prolonged confrontation with the system, many develop learned helplessness, the conviction that their actions change nothing and learning is meaningless. Breaking out of the vicious cycle of confrontation is possible only through dialogue and collaborative design of the educational process, where teenagers become not objects, but subjects of learning. Imagine a teenager who chooses for themselves what and how to study. This isn't a fantasy, but a reality in schools that have implemented personalized learning. When 15-year-old Sophia was offered to choose her own history project, she felt for the first time that the school respected her interests. She shares, "Research shows that when teenagers are given a voice in planning their education, their intrinsic motivation increases by 70%. At the school in Copenhagen, students weekly create individual learning plans with mentors. They determine not only the pace of material coverage, but also the methods of mastering it, through reading, videos, practical experiments, or group projects," explains school director Martin Nielsen. The key principle of successful personalization is a balance between structure and freedom. Teenagers need clear guidelines and support, but within these frameworks, maximum autonomy. Technology makes personalization accessible even in traditional schools. Adaptive platforms such as Khan Academy track each student's progress and offer material corresponding to their level and pace. The teacher transforms from an information broadcaster into a navigator, helping the teenager build their own educational route. When education loses touch with reality, it turns into a meaningless ritual. Teenagers feel this disconnect most acutely. "I spend 6 hours a day studying things that will never be useful to me in life." This is not just teenage rebellion, but a reflection of a real problem in modern schooling. Restoring this connection begins with project-based learning, where theoretical knowledge is immediately applied in practice. At the New Wave School in Barcelona, physics lessons transformed into creating solar panels for a local animal shelter. Teenagers weren't just studying the laws of electricity, they were solving a real community problem. For the first time, I felt that my studies mattered to someone other than myself and the teacher, shares 16-year-old Marcos. Another effective approach is involving professionals from the real sector. The Mentors of the Future program connects school children with experts in their areas of interest. 14-year-old Polina, who dreams of a career as an architect, weekly communicates with a practicing specialist who helps her see the connection between school geometry and real building design. "Now I understand why all these theorems are needed," she admits. It is especially important to help teenagers see the connection between education and their own future. Innovative schools are implementing professional trials, short-term immersions into various specialties. These are not just excursions to enterprises, but real work under the guidance of mentors. After 15-year-old Artem spent a week at an IT company, his attitude towards programming and mathematics radically changed. "I saw how abstract algorithms turn into real products that people use," he explains. The time has come to forge a new social contract between generations. A contract on education that will not just be tolerated, but genuinely loved by teenagers. This contract is founded on 5 key principles, accounting for both the needs of the digital generation and the timeless values of knowledge. The first principle is the recognition of autonomy. A teenager is not an object of learning, but its subject. Schools of the future will offer choices not only in how to learn, but also what to study within basic standards. The second principle is technology as an amplifier, not a replacement. Digital tools should not displace traditional methods, but complement them, creating a multidimensional educational experience. The third principle is connection to reality. Every piece of knowledge must answer the question, why, through solving relevant tasks and problems. The fourth principle is sociality. Education happens within a community where cooperation is valued, not just individual achievements. And finally, the fifth principle is the right to make mistakes. Assessment becomes a tool for growth, not a tool for control. These principles demand changes from all participants in the educational process. Educators need to transition from being a source of knowledge to being a navigator. Parents need to abandon outdated notions of success and acknowledge the value of new forms of learning. Teenagers themselves need to take responsibility for their own education. The world is changing too quickly to afford the luxury of intergenerational conflict. Education that teenagers love is not about indulging their whims, but about recognizing their peculiarities and needs. It is education that prepares not for the past, but for the future.